Welcome to the Warships Podcast with your host, Kellorn, Venacera, and Arun.
Hello and welcome to episode 93 of the Warships Podcast. Today, Sea Raptor joins us, your hosts, Kellorn, Venacera, and Arun, as he has some announcement about the new Summer Wargames Tournament Series. Welcome back to the show, Sea Raptor.
Thanks for having me. I'm kind of last minute, but I appreciate the chance to hop in and talk for a little bit.
Absolutely. So what can you tell us about the new Summer Wargames Tournament?
So what we've done kind of after the last couple of King of the Sea events on the NA server, we kind of, the admins and ourselves in conjunction with Wargaming kind of got together and had a couple of conversations. Kami was included in that, of course, a longtime host here. And we decided that we needed to be doing more to encourage new teams in King of the Sea style competitive play, because the King of the Sea format is unique. You don't play that anywhere else. Clan Battles gives you a taste of high-tier competitive play, but it's still 7v7 with no carriers. King of the Sea is unique. So we decided we would put together a series of small events, limited in size and scope, tournaments that we could run in about a day, that would specifically exclude many of the clans that finished towards the top end of the last King of the Sea bracket, in an attempt to get teams that were interested the chance to come play, get some more experience, maybe try out different comps, see some different maps, those kinds of things, and dip their toes into the water and have a good time doing it.
Excellent. So I guess my question is, it's funny because when that list was released yesterday, like most of my clan was on it, which was funny. I was not, because I wasn't with them when they were on their roster for King of the Seas. But I guess, can you give us a little bit more information about how are you going to run this tournament in a day? What are the rewards? And is there any difference from the rule set from King of the Seas?
Sure. So in terms of differences between the rule set for King of the Seas, the base format of the games is no different. It's still 9v9, one carrier, two battleships, and tier 10. That's it. The map pool was slightly different than the last King of the Sea, but that's normal. You don't usually see the identical map pool between King of the Sea tournaments. I believe I forget which two maps we dropped, but we added Haven and Sea of Fortune into the rotation. So 5 of the maps are the same as what we used on NA last time, but we added a couple of new ones in. In terms of what we plan to do, the format of the overall tournament is 3 rounds of Swiss. We've capped it at 16 teams per tournament. We've got 3 on the schedule now with long-term plans for more probably, but we're going to do 16 teams, 3 rounds of Swiss. And then we'll take a cut to the top 4. The top 4 teams at that point will move on to a single elimination bracket and play it out until there is a winner. Looking at that on a schedule, we feel like we can get all of that into about a 6-hour evolution. So if you're one of the last 2 teams playing, you've been there a significant amount of time. But it's no different than that length of time is no different than if you'd gone to a card game or a board game tournament or something along those lines. It's the kind of thing that we can start, in a late morning and finish up before supper time, as long as we don't have too many technical problems. For pricing. Pricing, we started off small here. We had originally spoken to Wargaming about the possibility of getting coal and steel into our pricing. They were not keen on that right now. It's still a new currency. They want to keep tight rein on that until they see how things play out. And then beyond that, we're just doing doubloons, but they're relatively small doubloon pools. The goal is just to reward people for coming and playing and maybe doing well. Everybody who comes will get some camos, and then the guys that make the top 4 will get a few doubloons for their trouble. The point of the tournament is not really prizing, right? Like, that's not why we're doing it. We want to incentivize folks to come play, but we really are there to give them an opportunity to hone their skills and get better.
Sea Raptor, were you guys thinking? I know we had, I think, talked about this before, but have you thought about the opportunity of maybe utilizing this format for a possible tier 9 competitive play, or were you maybe hoping to save that for some other type of play?
More than likely, doing things for other tiers will be different types of formats. We haven't really gotten too deep into that yet. For these events, these little small war game specific stuff, we're going to keep it to King of the Sea style, just because the event is designed to prepare or introduce players to King of the Sea play. We do have other events on the docket that have not been announced yet, things that we're continuing to plan in the background and finalize the rule set for. It should come as no surprise to long-term competitive players, on the NA server, that we're going to be doing another Summer Slaughter. That's something that's been going on for several years now. We don't have the rule set finalized yet, but it will not be tier 10. And then long term, the sky's the limit. I'm like you, Vanessa. I think I would love to put on a competitive event at tier 9. I think that will come to fruition eventually, just as soon as we decide where we want to plug it in and what format we want it to take.
How do you feel about the new so-called premium tier 10 ships? How do you feel like they factor into this? Or like, do you guys think it's good, or do you guys might think that, because it's limited availability, it might actually end up being something that harms the event?
It's something we're going to have to keep an eye on, no question. And that's something that, in terms of overall King of the Sea, for sure, that's something that we'll do in conjunction with the admins on all the other servers that work on King of the Sea events. The trick is, and we've had, the NA server, way back when we were doing Supremacy League, we were doing it at tier 8. And of course, tier 8's chock full of a lot of great premiums. We had premium limits built into the rule set at that time. I think it was 2 premiums max on a team. So don't quote me on that, but it sounds right. In any event, some of it's going to be, we're going to have to see how these ships turn out, right? Salem, of course, is available now if you've got the coal. Stalingrad is coming within, I think, probably in the next 6 to 7 weeks. 7.8, I believe, is when she hits the arsenal. And then who knows what's in line beyond that for tier 10 premium. So it's certainly something we're going to have to keep an eye on. If there's a sense or a feeling amongst the overall admins that something is unbalanced or potentially an issue, that I'm confident we'll address it in the rule set so that everybody knows what's going on.
Well, I think it's great that you guys are getting people involved. If they participate in this summer series that you're talking about, that's going to happen, Sea Raptor, will they be ineligible for the next event, or is that just going to be the King of the Seas? And I guess, how are you going to kind of go about that? And then I had one more question, but let's answer those ones first.
Sure. So for the War Games events, we're not really putting any restrictions on players participating in those, in the sense other than trying to keep the more experienced teams out so that the inexperienced teams can get the chance to play and develop and hone their own skill set. Long term, I haven't really thought about it yet. I don't foresee us right now restricting teams from playing in consecutive War Games events if they want to. If we get a lot of demand. And we have to start maybe a wait list or something, then we'll figure that out. We'll tackle it. We started these off with 16 team limits. Part of that is we're confident we can run that in a day. That's a manageable number. We're also kind of gauging to see how many people sign up. The more teams sign up tells us how much more interest there is. Maybe we need to consider a larger event or a slightly different format so we can open it up to more teams. And still try and get it all done in a day. So we're starting off with 16. We don't have any plans to restrict teams from playing in every single one of these War Games events in preparation for next King of the Sea, if that's what they want to do. And
then my other question that I mentioned earlier is there going to be any kind of streaming support for this from Wargaming itself? I know that you and Kami and Zoop were broadcasting the finals of the King of the Sea. Is there going to be anything like that, or is it going to be a little more low key?
For the War Games events, should be more low key. We're going to do it all ourselves, like we used to do for Supremacy League way back in the day. I was trading messages with Radar X yesterday, of course, the community manager here on NA. We had not been able to get the cross server event that we did with the Southeast Asia server onto the main World of Warships stream a few weeks ago, last month, I believe it was. But talking to him, it does sound like we're going to be able to get this tournament on the World of Warships stream, the main Twitch channel, on the day it runs, because it's a Saturday and there won't be anything else on that channel anyway. So we'll work with them to figure out how we're going to set all that up. But he did not seem to think that was going to be an issue. So we should be able to get a little more visibility this time, which will be good.
Well, if you want somebody to help commentate, I'm here in Austin and I can go in. No, I'm kidding. We'll see how that all turns out. But I'm glad that you guys are doing stuff, especially for the people that have not really had an opportunity and might not have joined the tournament if they had to face people that had done well in the last King of the Seas.
Well, that's kind of the thing, right? Like, you look at the teams that tend to do well right now, the last 2 events that we've run on NA, a great many of them are long-term veterans going all the way back into Supremacy League, multiple seasons of Supremacy League. So some of those teams have been playing together in competitive formats. The tier has changed, of course. We were playing tier 8 in Supremacy, now we're playing tier 10. But they're used to how it all fits together. They've got a lot of experience playing together, and Supremacy League was unique in the sense that you played multiple weeks in a season, so you could have bad weeks, you could have good weeks. It's kind of like baseball that way, right? It's a long season, and you had the opportunity to accrue a lot of experience, even if you didn't always necessarily perform all that well. With King of the Sea basically only taking place 2 or 3 times a year, we're not affording players the opportunity to get in, to play this format, first of all, to decide if they like it or not, and second of all, if they do decide they like it, the opportunity to play more of it and get better. And that was a deficiency that we identified ourselves amongst the NA admins, and it's something we wanted to address. So this is our attempt at it, and we're going to see how it goes. And if folks think this works, great. We're happy for that feedback. And if folks think it doesn't work, then hey, reach out to us and let us know, and we'll try something else.
Arun, Vanessa, do you guys have any concerns about the fact that they did exclude people? Are you concerned at all about the precedent that might set?
I'm not. I mean, it sounds like a good idea. And since they will keep running other tournaments too, I don't really see a problem with it. It's like a Little League, kind of, right?
Yeah, I'm also sure that, the big names, the people who are there like every tournament, I'm sure they want a break, especially from doing like clan battle and ranked and, the big King of the Sea stuff. I'm sure they probably want a break.
Fair enough. Well, Sea Raptor, we hope you can stick around for a little while and talk about some of our other topics today. I literally don't have anything written about this because they just threw this out on the Dev blog just now, but they announced the American Cruiser Alaska. Right now on Super Test, it's going to be a Tier 9 cruiser with 60,800 hit points, a 229 millimeter armor belt, which is significantly less than Kronstadt and Stalingrad, I might add, and the 3x3 12-inch guns that were used on what the Americans called a large cruiser. They also are giving it the dispersion ellipse area, similar to a Graf Spee cruiser. So it's better than battleships, but worse than cruisers. And we'll talk a little bit about what they're doing with that on Stalingrad a little later in the show. But the most important thing that I saw was that they are going to give it the ricochet angles of the AP shells equal to the American heavy cruisers, especially Des Moines. And that is important because it gives you a larger degree of normalization and doesn't allow shells to ricochet quite as easily as would be the case if it wasn't using that. So I think that's going to be really important. Otherwise, it really looks to me it's got a lot of the same things as Kronstadt. Right now, it looks very similar to Kronstadt, except with a little less hit points and the ricochet angles. I don't know how it's going to play. I'm looking forward to trying it out. But Alaska is something that people have been looking forward to for a very long time. And I'm, for one, am just glad to see that they are going to have it in the game here. Vanessa, I know that Alaska is one of those ships that you kind of enjoy from a historical perspective, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I was thinking about when I was reading the Dev blog about this, just an hour or so ago, if this ship is, I feel if it's like Cesare, how we tested it, and yeah, it's lightly armored, but has really good guns and really accurate guns, and with those ricochet angles, okay, maybe you might not be doing crazy damage, but at least you're doing damage, especially against other battleships. I think it might be a really fun ship to test and eventually have in players' hands. And it really depends on how accurate you can be and how much reliable damage, how much consistent damage you can do. If you can do that and be able to take a relatively good hit every now and then and not just, be a massive floating citadel, I think this would be a really fun ship. Though I am surprised that they didn't show a radar consumable, unless I was half asleep and didn't read that in there. But it's going to be interesting to test, that's for sure.
It does have radar, at least it says so in slot 3 instead of the plane. I'm interested whether what the shell ballistics are going to be like. Are they going to be very, very floaty shells like you usually get in American cruisers? Because that could make quite a difference between how the Soviet and the American large cruiser play, right?
I mean, that could give it an advantage sitting behind islands, similar to the way that Des Moines tends to do. So, yeah, I mean, that's a good point too. The initial velocity is low. I mean, the AP initial velocity is 762 meters per second, and the HE initial velocity is 808. So that is significantly lower than the Russian large cruisers have. What about you, Sea Raptor? Are you excited about Alaska finally coming to the game?
I'm excited about what she represents. I have not really found a good home in these massively large battle cruisers that we have right now. I own a Moskva. I almost never play the thing. I don't particularly care for her size, and I struggle with Kronstadt. I took my Kronstadt out just last night for a game, and she just doesn't feel good to me. I'm too used to the heavier, just the plain straight up heavy cruisers, right? They just handle better. That's just kind of more, it fits more my style of play. I like the idea of Alaska. I'm glad she's coming to the game. I'm really excited to try her out. Whether or not she's going to be for a match from how I play and my play style, I have no idea.
The funny thing is that I find Kronstadt, Stalingrad, and I will probably find Alaska the same way, to be very comfortable to play as a battleship player. That they handle better than a battleship does. They are faster than a battleship, and yet they're kind of in that middle zone of gun range. So coming from battleship player status, I find them to be very fun and comfortable to play.
So, I mean, I love my Scharnhorst, right? Which is kind of a similar play style. I mean, it's a battleship, but it's got battlecruiser guns and all the rest of this stuff. And I really enjoy Graf Spee and Scharnhorst, but for some reason I've never really found a good comfortable home with the ones that are in the higher tiers. I don't know why. I've really kind of struggled with them a little bit. Every now and then I can get a good game out of them, but by and large, it just doesn't fit me very well.
I think that's also the nature of the tier that you're in as well. I mean, if those ships were, probably at tier 7 with Scharnhorst, they'd probably perform a lot differently, but then they would be wildly overpowered. But yeah, I think it really depends, because these ships are, either at the pinnacle or near top of the pinnacle of our gaming tier spread, and the firepower and lethality of some of the ships that you face is just tremendous. And so any mistake that you make and you're gone instantly.
Well, I mean, it's not quite true that it would be that overpowered, considering you can get into tier 7 matches with her, right? Because she's tier 9. But Scharnhorst is actually a completely different type of ship, though. Don't you guys think so? Because, I mean, she's a very armored battleship with weaker guns, whereas these cruisers are, very powerful guns, but armor is mediocre as far as battleships are concerned.
This is actually a historical thing about battlecruisers, Arun. There were two mentalities about battlecruisers in their heyday in World War I, and Admiral Sir Jackie Fisher, the Royal Navy's leader, considered battlecruisers to be a cruiser hull with battleship guns, and the idea was that they would be fast enough to chase down cruisers and destroy them with their heavy guns, and then be fast enough to run away from battleships that could penetrate their armor. Whereas the Germans thought of it in a different manner. They said, okay, we're going to have a lighter ship that's called a battlecruiser, give it battleship armor, but give it cruiser-sized guns. And so it was kind of a different mentality of how these ships came to be. So, Scharnhorst is very much the German style of design, whereas the Kronstadt, the Stalingrad, and to some extent Alaska are more of the Royal Navy design, that it pairs large guns with kind of more of a cruiser hull. Alaska, as large as she is, and you can look at a picture of her, and she's right next to an Iowa class battleship, and they are very similar in size. For all her size, she does not have the same kind of armor scheme as an American battleship. She does not have the torpedo defenses of the Americans built into their battleship, and she doesn't have the power point in the screw arrangement that Americans put on their battleships. So clearly, the designers of the American large cruiser class Alaska seriously did not consider them to be battleships in any way.
Also, keep in mind, with regard particularly to the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, those ships were intended to launch with the 15-inch guns, but due to politics and time constraints, they chose the 11-inch, which they were more comfortable with. But, I mean, that's another debate.
Yeah, I think for me, what I think probably seals the deal for me is I just really appreciate the German armor schemes. I play a lot of cruiser, and to me, people who know me, I call myself an acolyte of the Church of Hindenburg. I've been a fan of Hindenburg for pretty much. She was the second tier 10 I ever got, and I've loved that ship ever since, even way back before she had the quarter pin on her HE. And Scharnhorst to me plays so similarly, and it's one of the reasons that I think I love the ship, but she's just so much tougher. She can take such punishment, and you certainly don't get that out of a Moskva. You kind of Kronstadt. I've had games in Kronstadt where I feel like I've done some trolly things with her armor, not nearly as trolly as you can do with Scharnhorst, but she feels, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but she feels better armored than Moskva, and it helps. But I get such unreliable and mixed results when I play that ship. I'm Alaska to me is kind of an enigma. I'm fascinated to try it, but I just have no idea if I'm going to like it or not.
Yeah, and like I said, we get back to the difference in armor schemes that kind of make up the difference there. I did look, Arun, and the AP shell velocity on Kronstadt is 900 meters per second compared to 700 and whatever on Alaska, 762. So I would expect that the guns will be pretty darn floaty on Alaska comparatively.
Atlantarks?
I don't know about that bad, but certainly something that the Des Moines and Buffalo players will recognize. But we do need to move on. We have quite a few more topics because the devlog has been a little busy this week. So, so the devlog announced a huge range of changes that impact the gameplay in a pretty real way. It should be noted that all of these are currently on Super Test and may or may not end up on the live server depending on how they perform on the testing. That said, I honestly expect that most, if not all, of these changes will make it through testing in some form or another. And first up on the list is the Japanese HE shells for 100mm guns are getting a 25% HE shell penetration, up from the 1/6, which is the normal HE shell penetration. This means that the base HE penetration for Akizuki, Hayakaze, Kitakaze, Harugumo increases from 17mm to 25mm. With the IFHE captain skill, it increases the HE penetration from 22.1mm to 32.5mm. This means that the 32mm portions of most Tier 8 plus battleships and many cruisers, which used to be immune to the effect of the HE shells from these guns, will now take alpha damage in addition to the chance to be set on fire. There are two aspects about this issue that I have questions for you guys about. First, is this change, made in the name of reducing captain skill requirements, too big of a buff for guns that shoot this rapidly? And second, is the penalty to detection and maneuverability for Akizuki worth this buff?
Well, the answer to the first question is definitely yes. It seems a bit, not even a bit, it seems way too good.
But I've talked to some people that are primary Akizuki players, Arun, that feel that the detection nerf and the maneuverability nerf to Akizuki, both of which it's kind of famous for being bad at, aren't the right thing to nerf to compensate for this gun advantage.
I feel like I agree there. I feel like the gun buff is too strong, and to compensate through things like concealment nerfs, etc., you have to go really far on that, and I think that might just change the ship and the way you actually approach playing it. I'm not really sure that's a good thing.
I agree with Arun that the change is too much. I think they're going to play around with this on Super Test or long enough to decide that they've gone a little too far. I personally think that the 100mm guns could use a little more penetration than what they currently have, but I think this is too much. The answer to the second part of your question in terms of the concealment and everything, I guess maybe it's a fair trade, but if you played a lot of Akizuki, she already handles like a fat pig compared to most other destroyers at Tier 8. I don't feel like the nerf is really gonna change all that much. She's already slower and handles far worse. You're gonna make her even worse than that. I mean, I guess she's already there basically.
Yeah, I've recently put in a lot of tests with Kitakaze and Harugumo, and this would probably make Akatsuki feel much more in line with those ships as far as the handling um, and the detection range, especially with Harugumo. But I don't know if that's necessarily a good trade-off. I, I don't really like the ships that I've been testing, and that would just make Akatsuki even more of a ship that I don't like. So personally, there's got to be something else that you can do with these, or maybe this is the flavor that they want to go with these destroyers to really set them apart.
Yeah, I we'll have to see how this pans out, but I'm a little worried that this will make them a little too powerful. So that may be something that needs to be adjusted. That said, we have quite a few more topics, so let's move on to the next one. Next up, we have the Russian destroyers and Chapayev. The destroyers Gnevny, Minsk, and Podvoisky get a 50% buff to their turret traverse speed, and Podvoisky also gets a reload buff. The low-tier destroyers also get a smaller traverse buff for their guns, and Tashkent gets a researchable main battery from Khabarovsk, and Chapayev gets a radar on its A-hull. To be honest, the most of these are pretty much just quality of life changes in my opinion, but the traverse buff to the mid-tier destroyers will have an effect on gameplay. And I guess, is this something that will make that whole line more desirable to play for the people that are struggling in those mid-tiers? Vanessa, you're our destroyer specialist. Why don't we go with you first?
I was going to joke. So did the Russians discover WD-40? And what about Grimyashki? But yeah, I think this will be much more desirable. I know occasionally I will pull out Gremmy and play some of the other mid-tier Russian destroyers. And yeah, the guns are, but I mean, when you're used to them, you just kind of plan out like, okay, this is going to be my fields of fire, and this is kind of how I need to operate. And in many of those tiers, unless you get surprised by a US, ambushed by a USN destroyer or IGN destroyer really close, or say Gallant, you can generally kind of figure where your opponents are going to be and kind of where your fields of fire should be. But this will definitely be a quality of life and should hopefully allow players who really enjoy the Russian destroyers to be able to maybe get in there more and knife fight a little bit better. Yeah, I kind of am interested. It also be interested to see if this will at all affect the Anshan, which I don't think it will, because it's pretty powerful, as well as the Gremmy. I think they'll probably leave those two alone, but that's kind of curious if they're going to touch them as well.
I actually think I think it's more than just a quality of life change, because think about it, these are the Soviet destroyers that still go really, really fast. Not quite as fast as Khabarovsk, but I think Minsk is like half a knot slower, or maybe it was one, but she's still really, really fast, which means that you still do all the crazy things that you expect in a Soviet destroyer, where you try to find that one gap between the two shells that are incoming. And I think that faster turret traverse is going to be incredibly useful there. I'm really surprised, though, that Leningrad is absent from that list. I mean, she probably didn't need the buff, but she'll just feel worse than the Minsk, in my opinion, then.
I noticed that neither of none of the premium destroyers were on that list, and I think that buffing premiums is something they try and do carefully, because once they buff them, they can't nerf them. So as much as I would love to get a little bit better traverse on something like the Gremyashki, honestly, that ship doesn't need it, and I don't really think that Leningrad does either.
Well, that's a very good point.
See, Raptor, how about you? Does this make the Russian destroyer line more interesting to you?
You're asking the wrong guy. I'm not a tremendous fan of the line. I am much more in love with the American destroyers. I've played the Russian destroyers. I own a Gremyashi. She's fun, but they're just not my speed. Now, I might go back to them with this and give it a try, because that turret traverse is one of the big things, especially in the mid tiers, that just makes me crazy. But I'd probably go try them again. But will it sell me on the line as a big fan? I can't say. Probably not.
Oh, that's actually a really good segue because our next topic is the American changes to destroyer changes. In American and Pan Asian 127 millimeter AP shells are going to have their fuse timer reduced from 0.03 seconds to 0.01 seconds. This is the same shell timer that you see on Minotaur. This will preclude them from citadeling most cruisers, but will massively increase the chance for their AP shells to do full penetration damage to other destroyers. In addition, Sigma value bugs for Seattle, Buffalo, and Baltimore were fixed to their proper level, 2.05 for the Tier 9s and 2.0 for the Baltimore at Tier 8. And South Carolina gets a little love down at Tier 3 with a Sigma buff from 1.8 to 1.9. Obviously, the big change here is the AP fuse timer for DDs, which will change the nature of the 127mm US-based DD guns. And I guess the question, and we'll go with you first, C-Raptor, is giving these destroyers an incentive to fire AP a good thing, or does it encroach upon the German destroyer playstyle?
No, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's absolutely a good thing. Anytime you're encouraging players or giving them more options with how they're going to play the game is a good thing, in my opinion. So giving them the option of, okay, I'm in a knife fight, I'm in a 4.5 kilometer gun duel with another destroyer. Do I want to consider the AP? Is raw damage what I need, or do I stick with the HE to try to knock out his torpedo tubes? How much information do I have about the last time he fired? Is he coming up on his reload? Like there's a lot going on in one of those destroyer knife fights, and I like the idea of the American AP being a little more effective than it currently is. I enjoy the German destroyers. The AP isn't unique. The viability of their AP is not unique to them, but it is one of their kind of national traits, let's say. The American AP we have now is not awful, but you literally have to be at suicidal, like point blank range to get cruiser citadels out of it. If they're going to take that away, I don't think it's going to bother me all that much, but it will be nice to have that AP be a little more effective against destroyers, because that's what you're more commonly going to be fighting anyway.
My question is this going to affect Flint and Atlanta?
That is something I hadn't considered.
If I recall right, that question has been asked, but no one has seen an answer yet.
That is a good question. I mean, usually the shells are uniform in the same way that people are asking if the secondaries on Zhao and Key are going to get this buff to the 100mm guns that they have. That's unclear, but my guess is yes, but we'll just kind of have to see. But other than that, Vanessa, I know you're a big German destroyer fan as well as Fletcher. What does this change what your opinion is on the balance between those ships?
Not so much. I feel like, here is a more uniformity of playstyles. I mean, the German destroyers, for many of them, do feel similar enough, especially in shell arc, in many ways, some performances. So I know, if you're comfortable with USN destroyers, it doesn't take much for you to adapt to a German destroyer. And I think, these AP shells, I definitely try to rotate or to bring them in my rotation. And I try and experiment or just use them as much as I can, especially against other destroyers. And this is going to be interesting because, I want to see how much good alpha or just raw damage that you can produce quickly with a good set of hits from AP shells versus just consistently, just spamming HE.
Fair enough. And C-Raptor, can you repeat what you just said in chat about the 100mm?
Sure. Yeah, the Wargaming did confirm that the change to the IJN 100mm guns does impact ships that have those as secondaries. Key, Ibuki, Taiho. I think even Zhao has 3 or 4 turrets on each side of those, something like that. So any of the Japanese ships that have those 100mm guns as secondaries, that pen buff is going to impact those as well.
Wow, CV buffs. Wow.
I honestly think that's pretty secondary, frankly. I mean, the effect of that, generally speaking, most of the Japanese ships aren't using secondary builds anyway, so that's kind of a neutral thing. But it does give Key a little bit of a reason to play her. But speaking of IJN battleships, in what's obviously the best announcement of the week, the IJN battleships are getting a buff. Izumo, the redheaded stepchild of Tier 9, is getting a buff to her deck armor and surface detection. The armor buff in particular will render her deck immune to 203mm HE shells in the same manner as Yamato. In addition, Yamato herself is getting a base turret traverse buff from 2.5 degrees per second to 3.0 degrees per second. This means that her base 180 degree turn time goes from 72 seconds to 60 seconds. With the Yamato Captain Special Expert Marksman skill, this brings her 180 degree turning time down to 45 seconds. This makes the new unique module a bit more attractive, but is also a giant quality of life increase for Yamato players in general. Not to be left out, Ashitaka gets the Amagi shells at Tier 7. Kawachi and Miyogi get a reload buff, and Miyogi gets a Sigma buff to make up for her 6-gun broadside at Tier 4. Finally, and a little bit off topic, the German Tier 3 battleship Nassau gets her reload nerfed from 22 seconds to 26 seconds and loses a repair party charge to bring her in line with the other Tier 3 battleships. So my big question for you guys here is, and we'll go with Arun on this one, is does this make the Yamato unique module worth taking?
I don't really think it changes all that much. I don't know if it's worth taking or not worth taking, but I don't think it changes whether you would or wouldn't take it.
Can you kind of give your reasoning there about why you think that, Arun?
Well, I mean, because you'll have this, like, the problem isn't that there's some kind of a magic number in turret traverse that you're trying to hit, which means that, yeah, they buffed the Yamato's turret traverse, and if you take the legendary upgrade, it'll be worse. However, it's not over some kind of threshold that makes it worth it versus not worth it, when the amount changes. So I don't really see this actually making a difference whether you would want it or not. If they cut Yamato's turret traverse in like half, sure, that would absolutely affect it. But right now, I think it's just a nice buff to her. And honestly, I am really glad about it, because one of the most frustrating parts about Yamato is when you need to turn your ship around, and then it takes, a minute to turn your turrets.
How about you, C-Raptor? Is this something? Do you play Yamato at all? Is this something that you would you like to see?
I don't play a lot of Yamato. I think I own one finally. I think I have maybe 3 games in her. It's not a lot. So you're probably asking the wrong guy. I know I despised Izumo. So anything they can do for that poor ship, absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to go back to it, but anything to make that a less painful ship to play is a good thing. To be honest, out of that entire list, the thing that perked my ears up that interested me a little bit was the changes to Ashitaka. That's a ship that I think doesn't get a whole lot of love. And I actually have had some fun games in it, and I'm pretty stoked for the buff there, because I've always liked Amagi. It's probably the last Japanese battleship that I really enjoyed playing in the line, and Ashitaka is a lot of fun, and I'm glad to see that they're bringing her Amagi's AP shells down to where she can use them, because it's one of the more frustrating things about playing Ashitaka is that the AP shells, like, they're not bad, but they're clearly not as good as Amagi's. So I'm glad to see them making that change.
Vanessa, any thoughts on the IJN battleships before we move on?
Well, I mean, you know how I feel about these quote-unquote legendary modules. I think the changes for Yamato will be, a good quality of life, especially as the game has, evolved and, the power creep and everything. I think, we needed to see some changes, especially in the IJN line. So I think this will be good. As far as Izumo, honestly, like, I'll never like that ship. I've never liked this ship since the game came out. I really don't care what you do to it until they put in the Tosa class or, something else in the Tier 9 slot. I guess. Yeah, we have
something else in the Tier 9 slot.
We have Musashi. No, I don't care what you do to Izumo. I'm not going to like it. I'm never going to use it. I hated testing it. I hated grinding through it. And that ship can just sink every match. I don't care.
And with those harsh words, we'll move on to the next topic. A new consumable will be added to the game called Main Gun Reload Booster, which decreases the reload time by 50% for 15 seconds. The French cruiser Henry IV will be the first ship to test this module. In addition, Jean Bart has been upgraded from Tier 8 to Tier 9 and given a 2.0 Sigma 26-second reload and a short cooldown repair party. Emily Burton gets a slight nerf to her guns and torpedoes to bring her in line with her tier. And in a controversial move, Alsace at Tier 9 is getting a main battery reload nerf and a Sigma nerf. Alsace, in my opinion, was far and away the most fun battleship to play in the French line. And I guess, does this knock her off her pedestal for you guys? And if so, should she have gotten hit with the nerf bat quite this hard?
It does knock her off the pedestal for me. And I don't think the nerf bat should swing quite this hard. You can argue that Alsace could use some adjustment. Wargaming clearly thinks so. I have not looked at one of the stat aggregator sites to decide if that's the case, but they clearly think so. I just think that this is, personally, I think it's a little too much. Alsace is unquestionably, for me, the most fun battleship to play in the entire French line. I hate to see her get slapped this way, and it kind of feels like a double insult when in the same announcement they move Jean Bart up to Tier 9. And so now it's like, great, there you're nerfing the existing Tier 9 battleship. You're giving me a premium Tier 9 battleship, and now the premium one just looks so much better. It kind of hurts a little bit.
Yeah, it does feel a little cash grabby, if that makes any sense. But I mean, the Tier 9 one, we can be virtually assured that it's going to be free XP. But still, I'm not really on board with the up tiering of Jean Bart. And I'm certainly not on board with slapping Alsace this way. So, Arun, how about you?
I don't think Alsace needed a nerf like that because she has 380mm guns, which means that when she fights Tier 10s, especially Tier 10 cruisers, those cruisers have some pretty good armor against those guns. And to me, it felt like Alsace wasn't quite as strong as people made her out to be, because she obviously has the weakness of 32mm everywhere, meaning that cruisers will eat her alive. And on top of that, she can't overmatch quite a lot of the cruiser armor. So I don't think she needs a nerf like that, although maybe, compared to other battleships, maybe she does. Although considering what they're doing with those Japanese destroyers, not so sure if she needs any help sinking faster or, well, not hitting things.
Yeah, that one's kind of a double slap on the face for sure. What about the main gun reload booster? I'm not sure how I feel about it. It feels a little gimmicky and it feels a little arcadey for me, but we do already have a torpedo reload booster, which honestly, when I think about it, isn't all that much different. But what do you guys think?
I like the idea of it. I'm cautious about how it gets implemented. I've actually busted out the Henri a little bit this week to play around a few games with it since they made this announcement. And I'm not 100% positive the ship really needs it. Like, I've had some really good games in Henri. So I like the idea of it, but I'm a little nervous that maybe it's too much. We'll just have to see how it all comes out in testing, I think.
I would have loved this change if they hadn't buffed the American battleship Citadels, because what I really loved doing in the Henri was just sail towards enemy battleships and then, surprise them with the fairly high AP penetration. And this would have been perfect for that, except you can't really Citadel those ships anymore because their Citadel sits at the waterline. I mean, you can, but they'll kill you before you end up doing anything significant to them. And the upgrades or the consumable seems quite interesting, but and I actually like where it's going because we haven't had anything like it in the game. Well, I suppose you could consider the torpedo reload booster to be similar, but this is slightly different. This is more like a buff, and we haven't had buffs, so I'm kind of interested to see what Wargaming does with this idea itself. Like, will we get other things like it?
Yeah, and like I said, it just concerns me a little bit that it's going down the arcade path a little too much. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see how that's going to pan out. And we've got one last topic for the day, which is the most recent upgrade to Stalingrad. The newest test version will be pretty close to what was called Stalingrad 2 in the last round of testing with the HE shells. with a 20-second reload, Graf Spee like dispersion properties, and a decreased range. This makes her very similar in gameplay to a kind of a larger Moskva without the 50mm bow armor. I personally found Stalingrad 2 to be less fun to play than the all AP version of this massive cruiser. But for you to talk about, for you guys to talk about, was Stalingrad too strong with the AP only, or am I kind of overreacting to this?
I don't know. I'm trying to remember testing with Stalingrad 2. I know Stalingrad 1 that we tested was pretty powerful. Those AP shells really hit hard, even, kind of at stupid angles, especially on cruisers. I was citadeling, Hindenburgs and Henri's at like 20 plus kilometers. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And I remember testing a bit in Stalingrad 2, but didn't that one have HE? And I think, was testing both the different shells, and I don't know, it felt more like other cruisers of that tier, but you were such a large target, and I don't know. I'm struggling to remember.
Yes, you are essentially correct that the Stalingrad 2 had the HE shells. Now, one thing is that Stalingrad 2 did retain the 32mm bow armor, which the Stalingrad run lost in the last testing, and they didn't say anything about that in this patch notes. Arun, where are you at with the Stalingrad? Do you want it to play very similarly to the line ships? Do you want it to be unique? Do you want it to be powerful? Do you want it to be average? I guess we've been all over the damn place with Stalingrad at this point, and honestly, I just want something that is unique, and I feel like the AP only version is that.
Well, I would agree with you that it would be unique, and it would be quite interesting of a ship. However, I have my doubts whether I want the ship to be even strong, considering how rare she will be. Like, I don't want the situation where we basically get the Flint, whereas all the other plebs are stuck playing, weaker ships. I'm really cautious about that, and I don't know if I would rather that Wargaming make their changes and get this right rather than have a ship that's slightly too strong.
Did you play around with Stalingrad at all, C-Raptor?
No, I didn't get the chance. I'm too new of a community contributor to have had the opportunity to play her very much. I think she was yanked off of everybody's accounts before I joined the program just a couple weeks ago. If I recall right, she might have been awarded to our press accounts for the wiki team at one point, but I don't think I ever put a game into her. So I have no idea. I have no prior experience with the ship at all.
Well, fair enough. We'll have to check it out when she is released. Honestly, at this point, we're kind of in a wait and see mode. We will almost certainly get access to this new version of Stalingrad in the next week or two, and we'll kind of tell you how it goes. That said, Arun reminded me that I forgot to talk about a topic, and that is the changes to the British ships. Specifically, the torpedoes for the Emerald and Leander cruisers, as well as a couple of the mid-tier destroyers. The change was that they increased the range from 6 to 7 kilometers on those torpedoes. In addition, Emerald gets a bit of a detectability buff, and just to kind of give it a little bit more survivability. In addition, the other big change that they announced is that all of the British destroyers will be losing the engine boost consumable to emphasize their defensive and hydro role. There are a couple other minor changes to the higher tier destroyers, as well as a detectability nerf for Cossack, which was honestly needed because it was at 5.1 kilometers detection at tier 8 or whatever it was, and that was just absolutely insane. But that said, Arun, you were the one that reminded me that we needed to talk about this. Where are you at with these changes? Do you think that these were tweaks that were needed?
Yes, Emerald buffs were absolutely needed. They should probably buff Emerald more. I think the best buff they could do is if they just added a button to the game that lets you just skip the Emerald entirely, even without spending free XP. I think that would be the best buff the ship could ever get.
See, I played a lot of Ismo games on the closed beta, and when it came to the live servers, I was like, I'm not doing that again. And I was going to make a video, a tongue-in-cheek video that was how to play the Ismo, and it was going to be me going to my free XP button and free XPing over it. But I forgot to do it before I got there. So, but I think you're right. Emerald, I don't think Emerald is terrible bad unless you get up tiered to tier 7. When it gets up tiered to tier 7, it is just mincemeat.
What do you mean unless? Is it even possible not to get up tiered in her?
This is a fair point.
Yeah, Emerald is awful. Anything that they do to help that ship is a good thing. I love Arun's suggestion of just put a button in the game that lets you skip her, because she's that bad. When we were building the British cruiser pages way back when, I played 3 games in Emerald on my press account and swore I'd never touch the ship again, and I haven't. I skipped right over on live. I wouldn't deal with it. So anything they do to that ship is good. The torpedo changes, I think, are just them trying to standardize things before they get the destroyers into the game. So that'll be fine. What else is on the list? I've forgotten. We spent so much time mocking Emerald.
They're removing engine boost and nerfing the detectability of Cossack, the tier 8 test destroyer.
Cossack needed that so bad. Like, the 5.1 detection was just ridiculous. I loved playing destroyers, but that's ridiculous. And then the speed boost thing, I like the idea of it. I think that they're setting the British destroyers up to fill a slightly different role. Kind of more of a screening role, and with the Hydra and everything, I think that works. That kind of reinforces that. So yeah, it works for me.
While I like that, I'm curious to see if these torpedo changes will also affect British Commonwealth. So will we see changes to Perth? And with regard to the destroyers, the removal of the engine boost, while it's going to be annoying, like, I understand, I'm glad they're doing something to make these destroyers kind of stand out from, the other destroyer, because in a lot of ways they're really similar to the USN destroyers, but with slight changes like this, you actually have a clear cut. Here's a distinct difference in both style and gameplay and options that you have between, say, a USN destroyer, a German destroyer, and a British destroyer.
I agree. And one of the cool things that I did notice from this list is that they're giving the British destroyers wide radius smoke screens. I don't know what that actually means or how that's going to be implemented, but I am kind of excited to see how that happens as well. I also should mention that one of the worst aspects of Cossack was buffed as well, and that was that the angles of her main guns were significantly buffed. And in addition, the number 2 turret was given the ability to rotate 360 degrees. So those were much needed buffs for Cossack as well, which should make her play much better at tier 8. Well, we wanted to thank you for coming down the show today with us, C-Raptor. Again, giving us the heads up on the new tournament. Is there any shout outs that you wanted to do before we take off for the day?
Yeah, just a real quick shout out to all the other guys on the NA admin team with me, working the competitive side here. That's Voss79, and who's been there forever, longer than just about anybody, all the way back to Supremacy League days. And then Sneaky Snake has joined us, has hung up his competitive playing days. He's going to join us on the admin team and do some casting with us. And of course, Quadralus as well. Those 3 guys have been instrumental in trying to get all of this stuff put together and moving forward. Quad is in charge of kind of the look and feel of the tournament. All the graphics and the art design, the logos we have all comes from him. And he does a really good job with that. So shout out to them. And a huge shout out to Wargaming. Competitive play on NA has had a very up and down relationship with Wargaming over the years. But now that we have Radar X to work with directly, it is like a night and day difference. He is fantastic. There's almost nothing that we've asked for that he hasn't either been able to give us or basically say, no, but let me offer you an alternative instead. Very rarely do we just flat out get told, no, you can't have that. Don't ask again. And so those guys have been stellar. You're starting to see more of these things like the announcements on the web portal because of his influence and involvement. So huge shout out to them for the support we're getting.
Awesome. Yeah, and I've really enjoyed my interactions with Radar as well. Arun, Vanessa, do you guys have any announcements this week?
Nope. No, I do not.
Alrighty. Well, that's it for this week. folks, as always, follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Warships Podcast and Twitter at Warships Podcast for updates between episodes. And don't forget to check out Arun on YouTube and Twitch as well. We may do something next week, as next week will be the 2-year anniversary of the podcast. Still trying to figure that out, but maybe we'll try and do a little giveaway. If you're looking for some podcast swag, we've started up a store on Spreadshirt.com that makes podcast branded shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, mousepads, and other cool things. The URL is shop.spreadshirt.com/Warships Podcast. We, of course, want to thank our amazing Patreon backers. Actually, we want to thank our new backers that we've gotten since we were on the show with Krigor, Arun and I, last on Monday night. We actually had a couple people join up and become new backers. We really appreciate that. Backers do get access to special giveaways, one of which we just completed. So I'll be looking for your emails for that. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week.